I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening. Welcome to a slightly different setup of the Teakink podcast. If you are watching on video, you will see that I have a little bit of a tea ceremony set up in front of me today because I am celebrating the launch of my teakink teas. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but it has finally come to fruition. I have created a Jasmine Silver Tip tea and an Aged Port Oolong tea. And it's been a dream of mine for quite a few years, and I'm very happy that it's coming together. And it is available to purchase on the links. We'll figure out how we're going to link that up in a little bit, but basically on my website. But I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you a little bit more about the history of teakink, because it didn't just start as a podcast. It started as an experiment of sorts, an experiment where I poured tea for members of my community. We're going to start pouring the Jasmine Silver Tip. So the Jasmine Silver Tip is a white tea, which means that it's not processed at all usually. The very first spring buds of the tea plant. And these are set gently nestled alongside jasmine blossom. So it's not actually infused in a traditional way, but it's the scent of it. And over 6 consecutive nights. So the jasmine white tea. But yes, teakink started off as me pouring tea ceremony for some mistress friends of mine who recognized that it was quite a sweet experience and that it brought out stories in them. And so I started to record these coming togethers. My first sort of experiment in the teakink space was pouring tea ceremony for dominatrices around the world and having conversations with them. And it was a beautiful thing in itself, but some of you may notice that I always have a hashtag that kind of comes before the words teakink. And that is because I kind of started that as a little bit of a rebellion against the way that we are often censored on social media platforms and how hashtagging can often put us into the dark. And utilizing this extra habit and obsession of tea of mine was a way to kind of potentially try to evade the censors as well. I thought that maybe people wouldn't judge so quickly. But we can see that the first flush is quite a bright and light one. Let's see how this goes. Maybe I'll move on to the second flushes. But yes, if you do end up buying the tea, you don't have to drink it this way. When it comes to Chinese tea ceremony, you go through many, many rounds. And I have specific temperatures and times that I like for different leaves. Sometimes that changes depending on my mood, but you can also infuse it for a longer period of time. Although I probably wouldn't recommend going over 80 degrees for a white tea and maybe 90 for the oolong. But yeah, so me, tea, dominatrices, pouring them tea ceremony, evading censorship. That's kind of where the teakink thing began. And then I started doing gatherings centered around tea ceremony, trying to give a different lens, a different experience to the kink gathering where we could maybe chit-chat and enjoy a little bit more of a subdued experience than just the raging parties, which I do love, as you all know, but I would want to maybe, give it a little bit more dimension. I think the whole thing with the teakink thing is I've been pretty open to how it's leading me and evolving in itself, but at the same time, it's been about just that story that we don't get to hear about, right? I think that's probably a central tenet of what I've discovered about the industry, that there's so many voices that are spoken for by people who have no idea about what it actually is like to be a lived experience. And so even though I kind of started this utilizing a love of mine, tea ceremony, and something that I respect and I enjoy, the world of kink, it's also something that speaks a lot to how I've come to navigate the world and understanding of fairness. And if you know anything about tea ceremony, I just looked at the fairness cup on the tea platform, tea tray of mine, and the fairness cup is all about pouring out the tea into this extra vessel to make sure that all the tastes get to merge, and so that you don't get like delineated layers if you're sharing, or even if you're not. But yeah, just a little coming together of all the parts. You know, I guess we can always see that if we're looking for it. But yeah, so teakink has been an evolution, but also a central way of just expressing who I am. And yeah, the tea has also been an amusing addition to that. I'm going to move on to my second flush, and then maybe we will try the oolong tea. But yeah, I mean, I chose to do these teas in particular because I used to drink these the most. I don't do tea ceremony so much anymore, but tea ceremony used to be this thing that I was progressing away from meditation for. So if you've also been listening, some of you may understand that I've had quite a heavy meditation practice for a few years, but that maybe I hit it too hard. And so my ability to function in an external world was compromised in some ways, because I guess I wasn't balanced enough to navigate the sensitivities that meditation was opening me up to. And so I made maybe not so much of a conscious decision, but I understood that I needed to start to sit in the physical a little bit more. And so I used tea ceremony as a way to do that. And I kind of came to it because somebody explained it to me very well. And it kind of struck a chord in terms of its ability to speak to a quiet moment, but also to live in a functionality, you know, like the whole procedure of it, the way that it can be a physical, whether it was the craft of a teapot, or the understanding of the fairness cup, or the way that you smell and like feel the texture. And when you start to drink one tea, it can also tell you a lot over the different steeps that you end up doing. And yeah, you start to get to know it. And so I guess I used it as a way to ground myself in the physical a little bit more. And yeah, it turned into a grand experiment and podcast. But I'm almost wasting the tea a little bit because I want to get onto the oolong. I'm doing this in the mornings. This is fantastic. This is a really great way for me to get into the day. But yeah, so where is this going to go? It started off as tea ceremony for dominatrices. It became a little bit of an event series where I brought together doms. And then the podcast has emerged and become its own glorious beast. And I am actually also working on some tea ceremony furniture that will also incorporate potentially some bondage elements. So yeah, it's been a really nice way for me to flex some creative thoughts that are adjacent to the world that is often limited by censorship. Yeah, censorship has been an interesting thing. So when I first started this career, I was obviously very naive. quite ignorant to some of the things that I would be encountering. I've started boiling the water so that it reaches a higher temperature for the oolong. Hopefully the boil does not overtake my voice. Maybe I'll lean away a little bit. But when I started off in the dungeon, oh, it's good to hear the boil, isn't it? Also, it made me lose my train of thought. But yeah, anyway. We're here about the tea today. We're here about the tea, and we're here on the oolong. And the oolong is a special one. So this is usually more oxidized. Well, usually oxidized and or roasted to a very careful degree. And as opposed to the white tea that isn't processed. But this one is oxidized by these little bites from cicadas as a focus. And they pick it early so that the cicadas don't have too much of a go at things. And then it gets shipped off from 700 meters above sea level in China to Portugal to mature in port wine barrels. So it's got a little bit of that deep fruitiness to it also. And yeah, I haven't had this one in a while actually myself, so I'm really looking forward to getting to that. Let's get the first flush down. You can already see, if you're watching on video, that it's a much more robust color than we had in the white tea. But yeah, I used to reach for the oolong when I was feeling a little frisky. And I felt like a little bit more of a slap around the face than the white tea. I did drink the white teas most days, but that already is a little bit more of a hand on the neck. Even in the first flush. But I'm going to rush to the second. But yeah, what was I talking about when it came to my first days at the dungeon? Maybe that I didn't understand. I remember now. So I started off, right? If you listen to the first episode of the podcast, it talks about why I started and how I started. I would encourage you to do that because it's a fairly long story and I'm not going to go into it here. But I started off out of excitement and curiosity. I entered the dungeon. I learned a lot of things. I'm in a decriminalized environment of New South Wales, Australia. And it's really exhilarating, and I get to try out different venues to work in and pay my taxes and register, not even register, but even just choose from the drop-down menu, sex work, when you're on a government website. And yeah, I had that kind of a freedom and ability. I could have bank accounts without issue. And only when I left Australia did I realize, in my naivety and ignorance, that I got a really generous start. That should be the norm, but it is currently not. And that's when I started to come up against things like the censorship that inspired this podcast, and the necessity to get creative with having a voice in the world. So in a way, I guess, I think my career would look quite different had I not encountered these blockages. Maybe more of a simplistic, straightforward path would have happened. I think I often have a little daydream about what the career would look like without it. And I feel like maybe I would have multiple establishments around the world. That's a little bit of a dream that I know I can't fulfill in this lifetime or maybe in this current state of play. So in a way, you got this podcast. Thanks to the chokeholds that are upon us. But I guess the thing is, without the chokeholds, it wouldn't have driven me to feel like I needed you to hear these stories. So, yeah, maybe it would have been, do I think that it would have been a nicer way of being for me to not have to do a podcast? Yeah. To feel like the stories are being told. Yeah. You know, I guess we can never really understand what the makeup of who we will be would be without the parameters. The parameters help to define and shape, right? I wonder if my curiosities would have stayed more solely in the creative and less in understanding fairness. But we're here now, and I'm really grateful that all of you have been listening and that you're interested, and that the things that me and my guests have had to say have been of any use. Yeah, it's incredibly touching to know that you are listening and that it is helping. And I am really lucky that even when I was in Bergheim the other night, I had somebody come up to me from Brazil, a psychologist from Brazil who was there on his freedom from cancer trip, and who said that, my work was of use. And it's really nice to feel like I have meaning. And yeah, we can get philosophical and understand that that is a construct. But after all, I am as emotional and human as the rest of us. So yeah, but I started this episode thinking that I would introduce the teas, which I have, and drink the teas, which I have, and tell you the history of why teakink even began, which I have, I guess, but I didn't bank on getting emotional about it. Maybe it's the life in the tea that is bringing it all up. Maybe it's reminding me of all of these sweet moments that I've had with myself, pouring myself. Such a beautiful little ritual. Maybe. But it's a sweet little dream of mine to have created the tea, and I'm really glad that it's come into existence. And it's a beautiful thing even for me to be able to gift it to the people in my life. Yeah, it's going to be a very sweet thing that I'm going to enjoy sharing. And I hope that some of you who enjoy tea or would like to indulge in, the sweetly visceral experience of what it can be, have a little look-see and see if you might like to have it as part of your daily experience or experience in general too. I'm pretty happy with a lot of the things that I've been able to create so far, and I know that it's not entirely my doing, that it's because of my family and my circumstance and the sex workers who have taught me about injustice and reparations and evading censorship in order to get the reality out there. But this little product is it's a cute little curiosity that I hope you enjoy. It's like a baby. But thank you for listening. I'll speak to you next time, and I'm going to maybe do one round on my own for old time's sake. Thank you.